For some reason, my laptop seems to be a little bit slow. Please let me know if there is any issue with my audio or video. There shouldn't be, but in case, just let me know so that I check my system. All right, so I think last week we spent quite some time. We declared the objective of cryptography. We spent some time, we talk about secrecy of, symmetric key cryptography and public key cryptography. We talk about integrity, which was the signature. And we also talk a little bit about authentication and the way that we can achieve them. So I just realized that I forgot to give an example for the scheme that we've just talked about here. I wanted to make a very important conclusion here, and I forgot my example last week, so we would start to discuss about it today. So in terms of secrecy, we said that, the cipher, Caesar's sheep cipher, which was a very simple algorithm that we just said that, for encryption algorithm, we take a message that the message space is, we would map them between A to Z from 0 to 25. We have 26 letters in English alphabet. With that, and also the key, we can add them up and just compute the mod 26, and then we would be able to map the numbers. Let me draw my, let's talk about my example. I forgot to make a very important conclusion over here. So as we said, how does Caesars work? So let's say, let's plan it out a bit. So let's say I have the character. Let's say I only work with the capital letters A, B, C, all the way to D, E, and then all the way to Z. And then, as we said, we would map this character into some integers. So I'd like to map them to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 25, right? So this is one of the keys in the construction, right? So we said that the first thing we want to do, we want to map our letters into integers. And then we said that the encryption would work as follows. So it would take a key and a message, and then the way that it works is that he would add the key and then compute the mod 26. And for decryption algorithm, we said that it would take the same key and the ciphertext, and it would compute the reverse of addition, which is subtraction, C minus K mod 26, right? So that was how it worked. Let's go through and give you an example here. So let's say I have Alice and Bob, or characters and Bob, and let's assume that Alice and Bob are in some long time ago, and they have already shared a key. So somehow, they met each other, or they pass through some messenger, and they know that the key that they're gonna use is, let's say, 2. So they both know about this key. And suppose that the message that Alice wants to send to Bob is just a message, hello, right? So we only have the capital character, right? So that's how she wants to send this message to Bob. So according to the construction of this algorithm, we have to chop the message into some letters. So we know that M, we will chop it into letters. So we have M1, M2, M1 is H, M2 is E, and then M3 and M4, both are L, and then M5 is O. And then she will go ahead and compute C1 equals to, M1 plus key, right? So it's gonna be H is, if you look at into or codec over here, encoding over here, so H is going to stand for 6 plus or 2 mod 26, right? And this is going to be your, the ciphertext of the first character. And then we go ahead and compute it for the second one. E is going to be 4 plus 2 mod 26. Don't forget this mod 26. For now, it doesn't really make sense to use 26, but when it goes beyond 26, it will start to make sense. All the way to compute, at the end C5. And then what she would send to Bob at the end is the combination of C1, C2, C3, C4, and C5, right? And we know that what Bob would do over here is he's going to decrypt the message. So for any, I'm not going to write them down one by one now. So any MI, it's going to be for any MI, it is going to be CI minus K mod 26, right? And so on and so forth. So for example, let's give an example. For example, for C1, for M1, what we are going to compute is a C1. So 6 plus 2 mod 26 is just 8 minus 2 mod 26, which is equal to 6, right? Exactly what she has sent, she wanted to send in the first place, right? Okay, all right. So that is being said. So this is what is happening between Alice and Bob. But we know that Eve might be present on the line. Eve is trying to do his malicious work. And let's see what Eve can do here. So this is what is happening between Alice and Ward. And I know that back then there was no internet, but probably somebody would give this letter to somebody, some mail system that they would, ride a horse to get the letter to somewhere else. And maybe this very same guy that is riding the horse is, or Eve guy in this example. So what Eve could do if he knew the algorithm, and let's just represent Eve here. The very first thing that Eve could do would be to go through all possible keys. Eve says that, well, I know the encryption and decryption system. The only thing that I don't know is the key. So, well, Eve would start to try different keys, right? So Eve would start with key equals to 0. And then he knows that the C, he has observed that the C equals to the first one is 8, and then 6, and then so on and so forth. And what he will try to do is he will try to use this key to recover the message. So if this is the key that they have chosen, you would try to iterate over all possible keys. And he would recover a message to be exactly the same thing, right? And so on and so forth. Then he will go back to this table over here, and he tried to map these numbers back to the corresponding characters. And he will get back to maybe some J, P, and so on and so forth. And then he would look at this and say, okay, this doesn't make sense. So, let's continue with the key. So maybe this is a wrong key. So then he would choose the key to be 1, and he knows that C is 8, 6, whatever. And then after he recovered that, he would recover M to be 7, 5, and so on and so forth. And then he would start to recover, I, F, and some other characters. And again, it doesn't make sense. And then he would continue with his search, and then he would set the key to be 2. And the ciphertext is again the same. And then he would recover some message such as 6, 2, and so on and so forth. And after do the mapping, he would recover the message to be hello. Right? And then he would just stop here. And he says that, well, I found the key. So, well, in the worst case scenario, he has to continue all the way to, 25 different combinations. And that is the maximum value that our key can get here. So if we want to write down our key space, then our capital K here is actually equals to a set of integers from 0, 1, 2, all the way to 25, right? These are all the set that it takes. So that means that the size of our key space, capital K, is nothing but just 26. And it happened that you see that this is a very small key size, and you can easily write a for loop. Now you have computer, and you can break it in a fraction of a second. So I want to refer to the algorithm that Eve just used here. And this algorithm that we are going to work with it a lot more in future is something called exhaustive search. So this is an algorithm that also some people know this one as a brute force algorithm or exhaustive search. This algorithm, it means that if Eve assumes that this crypto system is very good, so there is no mathematical problem underneath, or there is no other easy way to resolve it, or just Eve doesn't want to spend time to find the flaws in this algorithm. So the easiest way that we can imagine to attack an algorithm is to just, set the algorithm as it is and try all possible combinations of the keys. And the moment that you find the key that, the message would start to make sense, then you can just halt there and say that, okay, I think I found the key. Let's make a conclusion over here. So this is like one of the very first algorithms that we have seen, and I think this is a very good moment to gain some experience before we go forward. So the very first thing that we learn here is that no matter how complicated the algorithm is, we want the key size to be the set of the key or key size to be huge as possible, because no matter how good or complicated our algorithm would be at the end, if Alice and Bob have a small set of keys to choose from, no matter what we do, well, we can stop the adversary, and adversary can try all combinations of the keys, and therefore able to break the system very easily. So which would drive us to this case that ideally we want the size of the key space to be huge. When we say huge, we want this size to be something like 2 to the power 128. This is a huge number. So we want to have this many combination of keys. And if we have such a huge number of combinations of the keys, then, if you want to write a for loop to try all possible keys from, let's say you want to iterate from a for loop from I equals to 0 to 2 to the power 128, and then you want to do your work here, and good luck with that for loop. It would take very, 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 very long time to, do this execution. So therefore, the very first lesson that we got from encryption decryption is that no matter how good or complicated or how bad or the encryption decryption system or method or underlying math is, the first thing that we want is to have a huge key size. We should, like Alice and Bob, should have a choice of, selecting a key from a huge set. Otherwise, as you see, it is going to be very easy to break the system. So then we also discuss about some other cases on the same day. And so we talk about public key crypto system in a case that, we have two users, Alice and Bob. They wanted to, they haven't met each other before, and they've just met each other. And now that they have met each other. Yeah, I'm sorry, they haven't met each other before, and we wanted to have a mechanism so that they can share a key or be able to encrypt and sign message between each other. And that was the case that we introduced the public key cryptography, that every user now has a key pair. The public key, you can imagine that is just like your email address, and the secret key is the password for that email address. And people can send message using that email or public key to the other user with the knowledge that nobody except that recipient should be able to recover that message, right? So that was the concept that we've gone through together. And also we spent some time to talk about the integrity. How can we send and receive messages with knowing the fact that nobody can change the content of the message along the way, and if somebody does change it, we should be able to detect that change. So we have introduced a very small example to see one of the potential ways that we can do that. We also discuss about public digital signatures. And at the end, we end up by talking about non-repudiation scheme, that in some systems, we want to have non-repudiation. It could not be necessary for any system, but sometimes in the future, you may come across to design some systems that you need to have such a property. So it's just like drawing your attention that there are cryptographic solutions for such a manner. All right, so we landed here. So far, all we've discussed was cryptographic primitives. We call them primitives because they are the building blocks of cryptography. We normally use these building blocks to design more complicated systems. And these are the smallest things that tools that we have in a cryptography, so that you can use to build more complicated systems. That's why they get the name of primitives. So if you want to go through some of those fundamentals or primitives, of course, public key encryption systems, signature systems, or secret key, encryption methods, stream ciphers, digital signature scheme, we talk about them. Cryptographic hash functions, designing a cryptographic hash function, a good and a strong cryptographic hash function is also considered as a primitive. And the last, not the least, is a pseudo-random number generator. These are the fundamental tools that we need in order to, make the things stronger. Maybe, I should put hash function and pseudo-random number bit generator in a bit higher place. They are way more primitive because, for example, in digital signature, we saw that we use hash function. So we can really design a good digital signature before we have a strong cryptographic hash function, and so on and so forth. So a lot of digital signatures or encryption systems, you need to start with the source of randomness. So you can have that before you have a good pseudo-random number generator. So you see that how important the things are. And you're going to be using this as a building blocks to achieve and build way more complicated things. So passing through those primitives, later on in this course, we would end up by the new notation that it calls cryptographic protocols. So the cryptographic protocols are usually a little bit more complicated systems that are designed by combining many sort of primitives in the first place together. And that is one way to recognize that they are protocol. And the second of all, protocols are always need at least two parties to involve into the computation or involve into the overflow of the protocol. You can have a protocol that one party just send and receive a message to itself. That wouldn't be considered as a protocol. If we will have a protocol, at least we have two parties to involve. For example, a lot of time you log into some server, right? So the login to the server is already a protocol because you will always expect to have a server and a client. So the server would ask the client some sort of, authenticate yourself. Normally you authenticate with your username and password. And if your username and password is correct, then the user would, permit you to enter the system and use the resources. So as you see, if you have two parties, you can expect to have a login system to, you have one party to just verify his own or her own. That doesn't really make sense, right? So you want to have a sort of two parties to engage into this computation or the overflow of the system. So let me give you another example that let's get a bit more serious system. For example, electronic voting. This is a very good example. So in the electronic voting, you normally have a center that normally we don't want to have a center, but usually the algorithms they are centralized. So there is one server. So this center we call it a ballot center that it would cast the votes from different users. So imagine that this is the entire system, and then we have users. User 1 would send his vote to this system, let's say V1, and then user 2 would also cast its vote to the system, say V2. And all the way, let's say we have n user n would also send his vote, so Vn. And we should have also some sort of attackers, like we have Eve here. He's also trying to send his vote of Eve to the system. And then the system should be designed strong enough so that it can withstand the false information that it received from Eve and just ignore that information. And at the end, maybe it says that it counts the votes, and it says that Alice and Bob, Alice got, let's say, 3,021 votes and 201, and Bob got maybe 22 votes, right? So Alice basically won very good. This is the sort of system that we are talking about. So speaking about this sort of system, we want to have multiple things in place. One is that, for example, we want every user to have a privacy. By privacy, we mean that, well, the user should send their votes in an encrypted format to this sender. And when the sender receives this votes, if you just want to design it in a very naive way, we could just say every user, this sender would have, they would share a key between every user, and they would cast their votes. And the way that it does is that it would just basically every user would encrypt its vote and send it to the sender, and then the sender would be able to recover that vote and do the counting. And that would be the first naive way. Does anyone have any other idea what is a better way to do this? Or let's say if we just follow with the system that we use encryption, so every user encrypts its vote and send it to this ballot sender, and then this centralized center would count the votes and publish the results. Who thinks this is a good system, and who thinks this is a bad system? Or do you guys have any opinion? You don't have to type. If you want, you can unmute yourself and explain your opinion too. Any ideas? So I would repeat it again. The statement is that we want to securely cast everybody's votes. And as I said, every user would encrypt its vote and send it to the sender so that the sender can decrypt and read the votes. We use encryption because we don't want the Eve to see or every other user to see what is the other user's votes, right? So we want to have privacy. Do you think this is a good method?
It sounds okay. I don't know if it would be scalable, but it does sound like you wouldn't. But how would you encrypt it? Like the public key, what is it? The asymmetric cryptography that we just saw? Because you mentioned that was slow, right?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. So we are just saying that we are trying to stay in abstract and thinking that, okay, with some form of encryption, it doesn't really matter symmetric or public key at this moment, but they would cast their votes in an encrypted format and send it to this, centralized server so that they can do the computation. So one of the students she thinks that this could be reasonable. Anybody else agree, or you have any other opinion? It sounds convenient and time-saving, but I think most people aren't confident in electronic voting. I mean, people are still cheating in physical voting as well. Yes, Nine, there are things like that happen, unfortunately, in the physical world too. I mean, I should say in the not physical one, not real world. So let's see what are the other concerns that we can have around here. So when we say that everybody encrypts their votes and send it to the central system so that this center can do the counting, so this helps to protect every individual vote so that bring some privacy so nobody knows what everybody has, who voted for Alice and who voted for Bob. This is nice. But the bad thing is we have this centralized server that we trust in the first place. So, what if, despite of whatever vote everybody sent, the centralized server decide to just output this outcome, and what can we do about it? There's no transparency. We had to trust this central server to do its work, and if we decide otherwise, we can't even detect it, right? So it looked like that we have a problem here. The second problem that you can think about it is that how can this centralized system can make sure that some malicious vote, such as Eve, that should not cast his or her vote, Eve show up and cast the vote. What can we do about it? Maybe there are multiple or millions of this sort of unauthorized users that, if you think about the election in a country, some countries, they might want to, get into their system and change the results, right? So Eve is representing every attack of any attempt with any power. It's just like representing one person, but it doesn't really represent one, and it could be like, multiple Eve over here. So you see that we have serious issues here by just using encryption and having every user to sign their votes. I'm sorry. We can ensure that the entire voting system would hold in cases that we would have active attacker, such as what we have provided here, like Eve, that tries to put a new or malicious vote into the system to change the ballot. But also, we always trust the centralized unit over here. Could be a server, could be an organization, so that they would run this election. In the real world, we can imagine that governments or some institute or organizations would start to do that. But we hear here or there that there is always suspicious news about whether or not an election was fair. So the question is that, can we come up with something in cryptography that we can answer some of those concerns? And the answer for you would be yes. In this course, at the end of the course, when we learn enough material, we are going to build one of the systems together. And we are going to answer all these concerns that I just said, and even more concerns that I haven't even said yet. We're gonna resolve all these issues with the cryptography system, and we would see that the system that we would design can withstand a lot of different attacks. So I'm just asking you these questions to have you guys interact with me and give your opinions. So that you would see that very soon what a powerful system will be built together at the very end of this course. This course. We would also want to discuss about secure payment systems. So there are some secure payment system out there, Visa and MasterCard, for example, and their networks are out there. And it does not mean that they are the most secure one outside. So we are going to look into some other payment systems together and see how we can design one and what kind of attacks we can withstand. I think another protocol that is actually very sort of famous these days is Bitcoin itself. So in a Bitcoin, we have multiple parties, right? So we have a person who owns the coin, some vendor that, let's say I own some Bitcoins and I want to spend my Bitcoin. So there would be two parties that is in the system. It would be the vendor that would receive my Bitcoin and I would like to spend my Bitcoin. And on the other side, there would be also some other parties that are called miners that they try to approve this transaction, right? So these are just different examples of protocols and how important they are. So the first way that you want to recognize them is that if there are, at least two parties involved in a system in order for the protocol to go through. Encryption and decryption system, as much as we are giving an example that Alice sent a message to Bob, it doesn't have to be like that, right? Alice can just encrypt some message for herself. You don't have to have the second party to be able to execute the algorithm. Why, you may say, Alice would want to do that? Right now, that as we speak, most of you have modern laptops, and when you shut down your PC or Mac, your system would decrypt the disk, and you are basically encrypting everything on your disk before you shut down your system, so that when you turn on your system or somebody steal your hard disk drive, everything is encrypted. Of course, if you enable those features on your PC or on your Mac, which I really recommend you to do so. And then the moment that you turn on your laptop, then you would be asked to key in some password, and then your system would decrypt the disk, and then you will be able to, the system will be able to boot up, also access the rest of the files. So that example, you see that for encryption, decryption, you don't have to have two parties to be able to do that. But the difference with the protocols is that you need to have two parties, otherwise you can't run the protocol. So that would be one way to recognize if something is protocol and something is not protocol. Speaking of the protocols, let's go through some other example. This is a simple way of designing a one-way authentication protocol with one way. Remember that one party can only authenticate one side, and it's not entity authentication. Otherwise, both parties would be able to authenticate one another at the same time. So this means that, for example, Bob, in this example, wants to authenticate Alice, right? So let's say this is our story. So Alice wants to communicate to Bob, and Bob says, you know what? I'm not sure if you're Alice. So I want to challenge you, or I want to authenticate you, so that I can see that if I can trust you or not. So the way that it says that is working is as following. I'm trying to give you an example, and then the more information is in this text. So we would get back to there. So Bob is sitting here, and we assume that Alice and Bob, they have this public key infrastructure, and everybody has verification key out there, and then they have the corresponding secret key. So Bob would turn back to Alice and says that, well, if you're really Alice, I know your verification key, right? So I would draw a random looking number like C, and I send it to Alice, and this C is challenge. So normally the size of the C, let's say if you're using RSA, for example, is 1024 bits, right? It would change this challenge to Alice and says, hey, Alice, can you sign this challenge for me? And well, if it is really Alice, and this is a random, value that she receives, what she would do is that she would compute the signature S for him, and this is gonna be the sign. Oops. Sign of her Alice secret key, and then we set this value C, right? And then she would send this S to Bob. And Bob received this S, and he would run the verification algorithm. So he says that verify on Alice verification key, using Alice verification key, this signature on the message C that I sent to Alice, right? And if this is true, check if this is true or not, right? If this is true, then it means that this is Alice that you're talking to. Otherwise, Bob would conclude that, okay, this is not Alice, right? So the question number one, what do you guys think about this algorithm? So the way that we authenticate Alice, right? Do you think this is a good way? Any opinions? So let me repeat it one more time very quickly. Bob wants to authenticate Alice. We know that Alice has, some verification key and a signature key, the public key cryptography, that she published her verification key. So everybody, including Bob, knows Alice's verification key. So the way that this protocol works is that Bob would send a challenge message to Alice and ask Alice to say that, okay, if this is really you and you have this Alice's secret key, you should be able to correctly sign this message C for me. And Bob would verify that it was really Alice who signed that message, or the verification holds true. And if this is the case, then Bob is gonna trust Alice. Do you guys think this is a good scheme?
It sounds good, but it also sounds like there's a problem we haven't seen. From previous questions, that's what I gathered.
No, it's fine. I'm sorry, what did you say? There's a problem?
No, it sounds good, but it sounds like a trick question.
Oh, maybe, or maybe it is not. You never know. So, okay, so you think that this is a good protocol. Okay.
But would that mean that we just trust the server from there on and just decide that's okay?
Well, if we assume that this scheme is a good scheme, then yes, if Alice is a server, then if she can provide you this signature, then you're gonna trust Alice and saying that, okay, you are really who you claim to be, because if you didn't have this secret key, you shouldn't be able to sign this message for me. And if you can do that, you're proving that the signature scheme is insecure. But we assume, that, for example, RSA signature scheme is secure, so nobody can do that.
Yeah,
right?
but if we just trust it if we verify that Alice is Alice, that's okay with the signature. But if we just assume from there on the message hasn't been corrupted or any way faked, we wouldn't be able to know that, right?
Yeah. We assume that, from now on, we assume that, so in a cryptography, we always assume that then the channel is not noisy, unless if we declare that the channel is noisy because we want to use the properties of the channel to achieve secrecy. Otherwise, we always say that the network that, that Alice and Bob are connected to, okay, let me make it clear. They are using the same protocol. Maybe they are all using TCP/IP. And if somebody sends a message or a formatting that is not acceptable, the other party can tell. So there is no problem with the channel.
Okay.
So there is another opinion. I said this is, I say this as someone who has made multiple digital signatures for people. Something else as the digital signature would probably be more secure. Well, yeah, so we are assuming that this is the digital signature. So let me see, did I miss what you say? Yeah, but I agree there would be better schemes to do this, but now that we've just learned digital signature, we want to see if there is anything wrong with this scheme, and there's no problem as I can see in a secure way of what is going on with the system. So let me show you some other example. Let's see, maybe this helps to understand the situation a little better. So suppose that we set up this and Alice and Bob are using this. So, we are saying Alice, maybe Alice is some server like gmail.com, and multiple users are trying to verify if this IP or the server that they're connected to is really google.com. So they want to run this scheme to see if it is really gmail.com. Let me introduce you Eve, or enemy, that has been sitting there and watching the line. So let's say we would implement the system and we would allow our user to verify the authenticity of our server using this digital scheme. And after a while, Eve would observe this communication. For example, see that user 1 show up and send C1, and then the server return S1, right? It would start to record. And then user 2 at some other time show up, provide C2, and then the server return S2, and so on and so forth. So after some point, Eve collect n pairs, Cn and Sn, right? Different pieces of this interaction between our users and our server. And so now Eve is trying to impersonate our server. So meaning that Eve tried to be our server. So after Eve collected this information, right? So now we have, again, Bob comes back and we made this malicious server, that this malicious server is Eve, but it is trying to say that I am Alice, right? Right. But we know that Eve has seen this interaction between the true server, Alice, and other users. And Bob comes down here. And Bob would come here and say that, okay, if you are really Alice, sign this message C for me. But we know that this is Eve, this is not Alice. And what Eve would do here, he would check if he has seen this interaction and he recorded them before, right? If C is in, or let me write with the math. If C is in C1, C2, all the way to Cn. One of these challenges that we have received before, right? Eve has, eavesdropped the channel and recorded these pieces. We know that these pieces are not encrypted. We are just authenticating the server. Somebody would just send a challenge and the server would sign it. And Eve would just record all of them. And now that he tried to eavesdrop Alice, Eve would try to do what? He would say that, okay, I might not be successful all the time, But if somebody repeats one of these challenges, I can go back and check the history of the challenges that this server has produced before. And if that is the case, then if this is the case, then return some S that we have in our table, right? So then he would just return that S. And verification algorithm would of course hold true because this pair has appeared somewhere in the past in the history. So if Bob runs verify with the verification key of Alice and the challenge and a signature, this would become true, right? Because the server has really did this computation at some time in the past. So what about now, guys? Do you see any problem?
Yes.
So what do you think the problem is?
That you need to this challenge to be either too random or like too difficult for Eve to have enough to be able to record as many, to be able to guess or well, not guess then. It should be super varied so that it doesn't repeat often.
Yeah, that's correct. So in reality, we say, for example, when we use RSA signature scheme, and we use, for example, right now in these days, the recommendation is to use 4,000 bits at least, but let's just say we use 1,024 bits. So when you have 1,024 bits, the challenge C, that means that you can generate a value from 0 all the way to 2 to the power 1,024, right? So this is a huge number. So which means that if this is the entire set of challenges, this is the set of C challenges that they come from. And if we do how big, it's a polynomial time we observe, a polynomial with some days, with some months, or some good amount of time. No matter for some time that some long time, if observe this and record the signatures, all he would capture is maybe this much of this entire set over here, right? So if Bob really generates C, somehow randomly, and even though we have an Eve that records all these challenges, at the end, it's in some polynomial time, in some reasonable time. We can't say that Eve would keep running this algorithm for centuries so that, we can capture a bit longer portion over here. No. After some good amount of time, reasonable amount of time, then Eve would be able to, only observe a very tiny portion of this entire C. And that whole observation would not really help C. So to put that small tiny thing in perspective, I know your break time is coming up. So we can compute the probability of C to be one of the CIs over here is very small, 1 over 2 to the power 1,024, right? So this is a very small probability that it happened that you can choose a C that you have seen that C before, right? So this is like, if it is choosing uniformly random, of course, that would be the probability for every C to appear. So, after you collect some information over there, good luck with finding the right C. All right, so let's take a break. I think I already occupied 5 minutes of your break time. So let's come back at 9:05, so that we get a fair break time.